Welcome everyone to Maximus Live. This is episode 82. We've done so many of these, and it's so fun to join everyone. Thank you for everyone who's joining us on the multitude of social media channels. If you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand, and we can take live audio questions. If you're typing in questions on YouTube Live or Instagram Live, just type it into the chat, and I'll do my best to answer it. My name is Dr. Cam. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and psychiatry professor, and I'm also the CEO of Maximus, where we do health and hormone optimization. It looks like we got a gentleman here asking if you can call in. Yes, you can call in on Instagram Live, and I can try to weave you into our live stream as well. So every week we start out with a weekly unpopular opinion, and then I dig into live Q&A, and especially if anyone's interested in doing health coaching around diet, exercise, sleep, focus, and relationships. These are all areas of topics I have a lot of expertise in, since I do executive coaching with CEOs, VCs, and professional athletes on optimizing their health and hormone function. So this week's unpopular opinion, which I might have alluded to before, but I'll go in a little bit greater depth this week, is that the only drugs and supplements that are worth taking are performance enhancing. The reason I bring this up is I get so many questions on our community about, hey, what do you think about athletic greens? Or what do you think about this supplement or Y supplement? And, you know, there's a lot of, with even a lot of these supplements, there's emerging scientific evidence that you can point to almost nearly any common or popular supplement and say there's some research behind it. The problem is anyone can dig up a study and say that it works in terms of showing statistical significance. If all you're looking for is a p-value below 0.05, meaning that there's a less than 5% probability that this was just due to chance, you'll probably be able to find it. But scientists have much higher levels of scrutiny when they're looking at scientific research in terms of, does this first of all, pass the methodological bar? Like, was this well done research? And I'll give you a good example of this, which kind of popped up recently on my radar. Was, I was looking on Reddit, and people are taking all sorts of testosterone boosting supplements, including Fidogia agrestis, which I've talked about previously, that was popularized by Andrew Huberman on the Joe Rogan podcast. That is a terrible example of something that has scientific literature behind it that you can point to, and is a complete waste of a supplement. There's Dr. Huberman and Dr. Kyle Gillette both promote it, even though there are literally zero human studies that show its efficacy. All the studies are based in rats, right? So first of all, that's a good example of, you gotta actually read the studies and look at, was it done in human beings? Because there's a million studies that show mouse or rat effects. You can show things double, quadruple, quintuple testosterone in mice and rats, and it almost always fails in humans. We're just not the same as mice or rats in terms of our HBG axis system. And then, ironically though, in the rat studies that were done with Fidogia agrestis, they showed clear signs of testicular and kidney toxicity. So it may be that this herb is actually toxic, even though in rats it may have some testosterone boosting capabilities. So is the cost benefit worth it in terms of risking testicular toxicity? I would argue clearly not. It's not a well-studied herb. We don't have very much evidence about it in the scientific literature. It hasn't been used clinically or culturally very much, outside of maybe very small use in certain indigenous African cultures, but it's not like widespread use like tea for thousands of years, where we have enough sort of anecdotal data regarding the safety of that. And so it's kind of funny because, if I was looking at some YouTube videos, some people defending Fidogia agrestis and saying, well, humans are not the same as rats. We're able to process toxins better than rats. And so I was like, well, okay, this is a very silly line of reasoning. We're saying that the rat data in terms of testosterone boosting should translate to humans, but the toxicity data, because it's a rat and humans are different, should not translate to humans. So you're basically cherry picking the good effects as, yes, that will translate, and you're taking the side effects and saying, no, that won't translate. That is just illogical, quite frankly. I think it's just bad science. And this is why I think it's really important to be very scrutinizing of the scientific research and make sure that even experts who are physicians or professors still sometimes screw up in terms of the interpretation, quite frankly, because they're lazy, they're outside of their area of expertise, because they're neuroscientists who don't know much about hormones, or even physicians who know about hormones are involved in promoting their friends' products, like Gorilla Male Sigma. New testosterone boosting product was developed in consultation with the both of them. And so now they kind of have a financial conflict of interest. And so I think it's really important to not get overhyped by whatever the new hot supplement is. If it hasn't been well utilized for a long time, there's not a lot of human data on it, and we really don't understand its safety profile or mechanism of action. If you compare that to a pharmaceutical medication where we know it's at least pure, even if it's been used for other reasons and we're using it off-label for testosterone boosting, there's still a wealth of data. Maybe there's tens, hundreds of thousands of people who've been on this drug in general, maybe for, like I said, different indication, but we have good safety profile data on the basis of that. That is a much better idea, to take a well-studied pharmaceutical drug that's been on the market for decades, rather than some random herb that we have no idea what it is and the toxicity of it. So to me, it's preposterous, quite frankly, that they're shilling these sort of rare herbs rather than relying on tried and true pharmaceutical drugs. And it's ironic too, because sometimes they'll point out and say, oh, but these pharmaceutical drugs have side effects. Of course, every single drug has side effects. Aspirin has side effects. But we know the side effects. It's better the evil that you know than the evil that you don't know. And so they're saying, well, okay, we don't know that much about the toxicity of this herb, but we know about side effects of this drug. And I was like, yes, that's because it's been so well studied. You study anything long enough and in enough people, side effects will pop up. Even if the side effects occur at 0.1% rate, that means out of 1,000 people, one person will have that side effect. But in these studies of rats, or maybe studies of 20 people, you don't have enough of a base rate or a sample size in order to have that side effect pop up. So how should you make a decision about what drugs and supplements that you make? One, make sure that there's very strong scientific evidence behind it, strong safety data behind it, and strong efficacy data. And this is why I said the only drugs you should be using are performance enhancing. If you don't feel or measure a difference, you probably should not be taking it. And this is a generally useful heuristic. If pro athletes or bodybuilders aren't commonly taking it, you probably shouldn't be taking it either. Now, that doesn't mean to take everything that pro athletes and bodybuilders take. Obviously, a lot of them take steroids because they have millions of dollars on the line, and they're quite frankly willing to harm their health in order to get a contract. That doesn't apply to the average person. But it does tell you whether the things that are taking, for the most part, unless it's out of superstition, they're pretty shrewd about stuff. They don't take stuff that doesn't clearly improve their performance, because that's all they care about, right? Performing at very, very high levels. Unfortunately, if you look at biohackers take tubs and millions of bottles. I saw a famous influencer swallowing like 50 pills. And I was like, do you know that actually does anything? I probably take less than a handful of supplements, because in the supplements that I take, there's super strong scientific evidence behind. Let's take vitamin D, for example. Super strong scientific evidence behind vitamin D. I can measure the difference, right? I can measure that I'm suboptimal when I don't supplement vitamin D. I can measure my levels afterwards. They more than double. And there's clear evidence that when you're suboptimal, you have higher risk of viral infections, severity of COVID, etc. When you're above 50, risk of COVID, severe COVID in terms of hospitalization and death, almost nothing. In addition to like the benefits of 200 plus functions in your body in terms of vitamin D. That's a good example of something. Vitamin D, I would say, some people feel it in terms of the subjective benefits, but you can clearly measure it, and there's very strong scientific evidence around it. Other supplements, it would take creatine, for example, super strong evidence in terms of as an ergogenic or sports aid in terms of increasing the amount of reps that you can do, building lean muscle mass, decreasing fat mass, improving cognitive performance, particularly when sleep deprived. There's such a overwhelming preponderance of research. That one, it's hard to feel. Maybe you'll notice it slightly, but it's so strong, the evidence, that that it's clearly working. So what's an example of something that you could probably more clearly feel. I would argue, like, let's say the B vitamins in a good multivitamin, right? If you're taking particularly the bioactive forms of B vitamins, for instance, P5P as vitamin B6, a really good B complex as part of a multivitamin, you do feel more energized, right? That's why, in fact, if you take them too late at night, it can actually mess with your sleep. They're almost too energizing. Taking a good bioavailable form of a multivitamin in the morning, most people do feel a difference in terms of their energy levels because those B vitamins are energizing. So that's another good example of something that you should take because you can clearly, tangibly feel the difference. Same thing with obviously our King protocol. When you double your testosterone, you clearly feel it. Same thing with our Lover protocol. When you increase your blood flow, you clearly notice the difference in the bedroom and the gym. And so if you can't measure or feel the difference in a way that is improving your performance athletically, romantically, or in terms of your work performance, it's probably not worth taking because then you're just taking a supplement because some influencer told you to. You don't really notice any tangible difference. You're probably just wasting your money flushing expensive vitamins down the toilet that have no benefit. And remember too, with every additional supplement that you take, there is increased toxicity risk because none of these things are pure. Even though supplement industry is not well regulated, there's a lot of heavy metals and pollutants and chemicals. And when you start taking 10, 20, 50 supplements, just the strain that it puts on your liver and kidneys in terms of processing all of these chemicals and the potential pollutants goes up. So I'm obviously very pro selective pharmaceutical and supplement use, but you want to be thoughtful and picky, quite frankly, in terms of what you're putting in your body. Put the stuff in that has the highest bang for your buck. It's producing an ROI in terms of you can feel the benefits, you can measure the benefits in a clear and tangible way that's increasing your performance. So treat yourself like a corporate athlete, as I like to say. Even if you're not a professional athlete, you are trying to be a high-performing man. You're trying to do the best that you can at work, in your romantic life, your social life, at the gym, etc. And so if you aren't getting those tangible benefits, it's probably not worth it. And so I like to personally be conservative about these things and say more is not better. We have to get out of this classic American mentality of more is always better, and be very picky about what you take. And that's not to say that you can't experiment with stuff. I run through trials of things all the time. I'll hear about something that's interesting and hot. I talked about Morosil, for instance, last week as a very interesting, promising new supplement. There's at least 2 human randomized control, placebo-controlled, double-blind clinical trials that showed pretty good evidence in terms of reducing body fat, waist circumference, fat mass, and given it's an extract of a blood orange, probably pretty safe given it's a fruit-based extract, low likelihood of toxicity or side effect risk. So given all that, very promising. I'm trialing it right now. I'll see if it works. If it doesn't work, it gets out of my regimen, right? So I don't just rely on the research evidence. You just have to try it for yourself, and everyone's body reacts very differently. So, it's okay to experiment with things, but you should be tracking meticulously your weight. I step on the scale every day. Body fat analysis. You can use Amazon Halo, as I talked about, and other things to be like, is it living up to the claims in the research study for me and my body? And so if it's fulfilling its promise, great, keep taking it. If it's done its job, like you've achieved your weight loss goals, maybe you don't need to continue to take it. Maybe you just take it as needed. And if it's not working, obviously ruthlessly cut it out of your regimen. If you don't know if it's working, you shouldn't probably continue to take something if you can't point to very clear, visible, or quantifiable benefits. All right, with that being said, let's get to questions. Someone's asking, is this live being recorded and saved for rebroadcast? Yeah, we put all of these videos up on YouTube, so you can always check that out there.
Hello.
Hi, sir. How you doing?
I'm good. Is the camera on for me?
No, it's not.
Okay, good.
That's fine. Audio is all we need, so we can keep
Yeah, I
it.
didn't brush my teeth.
That's all good. That's all good. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
Wonderful, wonderful. How can I help you?
Yeah, so let me tell you a bit about myself. So
Sure.
I'm a anesthesiologist in the city here.
Wonderful.
I'm retired, and so in the last maybe 18 months, I was competitive bodybuilder,
Wonderful.
and never had problems, you know, gaining muscle and keeping muscle and strength. And in the last 18 months, no matter what I do, you know, it's kind of got me very concerned, because, you know, that's really important to me.
For sure. Makes
Now,
sense.
um,
Are you, now, have you just plateaued, or you're actually noticing a decrease in terms of strength and hypertrophy?
decrease in strength and you know, I didn't work out like I used to during the pandemic,
Sure.
but still, that never used to be a problem. I could just pick it right up,
Yeah.
and I haven't been able to do that. One kind of unusual thing is that I don't practice anesthesia anymore because I was diagnosed with narcolepsy, and so I don't have to sleep like a normal person.
Sure.
And so anyway, so I had you know, one of my internists just provide testosterone for me, and it doesn't really seem, you know, I had a kind of a lowish testosterone level. It doesn't seem to make a difference, and so I'm wondering what I can do.
Yeah, good question. How old are you now?
I'm 57.
Okay. And how's your level of fitness lately? Obviously, you were very fit if you were kind of doing professional or competitive bodybuilding
Well,
back
I
in the
mean,
day.
I was an amateur, but
Yeah.
yeah. Cardiovascularly, I'm fit. I just, muscular-wise and weight-wise are the things that concern me.
Makes sense. What's your current height and weight, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm 5'8", and let's see, about 190, but I'm normally like about 213 and no fat, you know. So I'm like built like a fire plug, you know.
Yeah, that's great.
Short, yeah.
And so right now at 190, like how's your body fat, whether if you know your percentage or just visually?
A little more than I've had in the past around my waist, but nothing, you know. I don't have the musculature in my abdomen that I'm used to
Yeah.
having, but so there's probably a little bit more fat there, but it's, you know.
So you mentioned you were like 213 previously?
Yeah, so about 210-ish to two, you know. That's probably my average.
And this is when you were doing the amateur bodybuilding?
Yeah.
So what do you attribute sort of the 20-pound loss? Is it just the decrease in the frequency of the exercise?
I think that's part of it, but I can't. I just can't gain weight, you know.
Yeah. Were you using anabolics at the time when you were doing bodybuilding?
No, a long time ago when I was you know, when they used to give them to you when you were in high school, you know. But never, you know, since then.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, at your height and weight, even at 190, I mean, your BMI is at 28.9. Now, obviously, it's contingent on your body fat, but like maintaining 210 at 5'8", especially you know, very lean 210 as you're describing, is a super high fat-free mass index, as they call it, right? It's probably not.
I mean, I always go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's probably not sustainable, quite frankly. Like you don't see that level of fat-free mass index except for like competitive CrossFitters, and they're pretty much all using performance-enhancing drugs in order to maintain that. Like guys like Rich Froning are kind of similar profiles to you, 5'8", 210, ripped, almost assuredly on PEDs. Just it's very hard at that height or weight to maintain that level of just musculature, even
What's a PED?
Sorry, performance-enhancing drugs.
Okay.
So I would say, yeah, it's probably not realistic to try to like go back to that, especially at this age. But I think you can obviously maintain a very healthy, you know, around the current weight that you're at, even maybe a little lower if there's some body fat to lose.
I think I'm at the 210, 13. I probably had a fair amount of body, you know. That wasn't all lean.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes more sense.
I was eating a lot, you know. I was in my, you know, I've always kind of eaten the same, you know, ton of protein, you know, and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I'm not really as concerned about how I look necessarily, although that's important. It's my strength,
Sure.
you know, when I go to lifts, because I never was into just, you know, appearance.
Right.
I loved lifting a lot of, heavy
Right.
weights.
Yeah,
And that's very important to me.
for sure. How much have you noticed? Have you noticed like a X percent or X pound decrease on one of your lifts that's made you concerned?
Well, it goes down. It's like your golf handicap, that
Sure.
goes up. And, it's the problem with going, and so I'm always comparing, oh, geez, this is what I used
Right.
to answer your question, I guess, I don't know, maybe 20%, 15, 20% down from what I could do before
Yeah.
the pandemic, when I was, um,
How frequently were you working out pre-pandemic, and how
oh,
frequently are
a
work?
lot. Yeah, I mean, I worked out many hours a day. Um,
Hmm. And how much are you
uh,
working out now?
Now, not many hours.
Okay.
Because part of it is I'm getting disappointed and I come home from the gym and, that sort of thing.
Yeah, makes
Uh,
sense. I mean, how much would you just attribute it to that? I mean, if you drop your volume significantly, it seems like the most obvious Occam's razor, answer.
I think it's something else is going on. I don't know, not, that I have cancer or anything, but
Yeah.
um, um, my body doesn't act the same.
Yeah.
It takes longer when I work out, it's taking a lot longer to heal. Um, like I said, I used to work out every day of the week,
Right.
and
Um,
not have a problem with it.
totally. And you said you experimented, it sounds like, with some TRT. Like, what dosage were you taking, and what did you notice in terms of the strength effects? Not much.
Well, and hairiness, which I've never had before,
Right.
and maybe a little more not road rage, but a little more aggressive as far as that goes, and it improved things somewhat, but I just think there's something, um, I don't know. I don't know whether I need to go see an anti-aging person or, I was very encouraged by your whole approach.
Mm-hmm.
I just kind of fell into this.
You're right.
Uh, it was, I don't know how.
Do you know what your testosterone levels were, at baseline, like pre-TRT, and do you know how much they went up um, on TRT?
They were, geez, I'd have to go and look. They were maybe 800.
On TRT?
No, no. My baseline, something like that. I'd have to go back and look at it.
It would be helpful. I mean, it's useful to look at your SHBG too. We focus a lot more on free testosterone rather than total testosterone. Guys who
Okay.
naturally have high total testosterone tend to have high SHBG too. So I think it's actually misleading because 800 is quite high. It is probably higher than most young men. But if your SHBG is high, your free is not as high. The body essentially overcompensates by producing more total testosterone because more of it is bound up to the SHBG. So we use the Vermilion equation to calculate free T. So that'd be useful to know.
Yeah, to tell you the truth, I don't remember what it was. I
Yeah.
just,
If you look
it
it
was
up,
kind of,
and then if you hop on our community, or we have a Discord, it's maximustribe.com/discord. You can type it into the King Protocol chat, and I'm happy to take a look at it with you. But just if we're doing our best guess with the limited data that we have here. 800 is not low in general. Even with a high SHBG, I can't imagine your free testosterone is, even if 800 is high total testosterone with high SHBG, your free testosterone is probably going to still be within the average range. It's probably not going to be low. Your SHBG would have to be sky high, like 100 plus, for your free T to be low. So it doesn't sound like testosterone is potentially the culpable factor
right.
etiologically in terms of the strength decrease. Also, the other point of evidence that points to that is going on testosterone replacement, which does very clearly from the research evidence increase strength gains, which is why power lifters and other competitive strength athletes clearly use TRT. You didn't notice much of a function there. It makes me wonder. Okay, well, there's at least two data points that are suggesting that maybe it's not testosterone that's contributing to it.
That's kind of what I'm thinking. It didn't, I thought, well, maybe I need to be higher. I never had my testosterone checked before. And I'm wondering if there's something else, because narcolepsy, we don't have the same, we have a very abnormal sleep pattern.
Right. How much are you sleeping with
if it's thyroid, if it's growth hormone, if it's something
How much are you sleeping with the narcolepsy?
else. We never sleep normally, so it's very difficult to get into stage 5. I take a drug called Xyrem, which is, I go to UC for my sleep. Xyrem is GHB.
Right.
And I take Dexedrine during the day. It's a very abnormal, so you're never fully awake or asleep. And I'm wondering if that might have something to do with it, and that could be.
How long have you had narcolepsy, or how long did you start getting treatment for it?
I've only been getting treatment about 5 years, but I got it when I was about 13. I started noticing. It's very hard to describe to somebody because sleep is so fundamental. But
when did you start noticing
worse?
Yeah, when did you start noticing the decrease in strength? Has that been quarantine?
Decrease in strength was a year and a half or so.
Okay. So, look, this is obviously complex and multifactorial.
Yeah.
I don't need to tell you that, but, even though it sounds like you're in treatment for your narcolepsy and you're obviously taking the appropriate drugs to fall asleep and stay awake during the day, obviously with the Dexedrine, is it possibly influencing all this? Highly likely, right? Just, two things. One, the symptom that you're describing in terms of slower recovery and restoration, that is definitely just also a normal function of aging. I can tell you, talked to a lot of guys in their 30s and they're complaining of that, much less in their 50s. So, especially recovery from intense weightlifting tends to decrease over time. Interestingly, I think men can maintain their strength and their testosterone well into their 50s and 60s. But strength to some degree does start to decrease with older age, and then recovery in particular does. So I would say that is not unusual, what you're describing. And then second, it's probably exacerbated, certainly if you're not getting deep restorative sleep as a function of the narcolepsy, or obviously and or the medications that you're taking. So the challenging question here is just like, what is normal right now compared to your previous baseline prior to a year and a half ago? You are experiencing subjectively what obviously is abnormal, but given perhaps an exacerbation of age and medical condition, is it truly abnormal? This is where it gets fuzzy. Like, is a 20% decrease over the span of 1.5 years a reasonable enough decline that we could attribute it to that? It's hard to tell. But there is, the complicating factor, and this is a little bit of a chicken and the egg problem of saying, well, you've also decreased your training volume quite a bit. And to your point, now you've decreased it out of frustration, but maybe that also exacerbated it over time. So it sounds like, maybe that's one variable that really needs to be potentially addressed. I'm sure you've thought about it, but in terms of getting back into a more frequent training regimen, what's kept you back from that?
Oh, I recently moved.
Mm-hmm.
I just a lot. I had COVID.
Yeah.
Kind of a bad case of COVID, and to be quite honest, I got an email, a link to have this conversation just an hour ago, and so I wasn't able to prepare myself mentally or look at my labs or something. And I apologize.
No, it's okay. It's fine. It's fine to have open-ended conversation, and I think a lot of this is kind of exploratory, as you can obviously appreciate, in being a physician yourself. So, here is just some kind of preliminary thoughts that I had. Given it's complex and multifactorial, and you have a lot of variables that are going on that make your case obviously more complicated. One, I think given your age and the potential impairment of your recovery, given a complicating medical condition of narcolepsy, you may want to consider getting back on a just kind of a consistent workout routine. Now, obviously, moving COVID, I totally appreciate and empathize that there are factors that threw us all off, but just a consistent routine in terms of your biorhythm of working out same time, same days, just really I think adds that regularity and actually is good for strength. So a good example of this is men are stronger in the evenings than they are in the mornings, right? Testosterone levels increase in the evenings, peak actually when we're sleeping, but there's good evidence of that. Now, the caveat to that is people are
Not for
strongest.
me, probably. Yeah.
Yeah, people are strongest at the time that they're used to working out. So if you're used to working out in the morning every single morning, and then all of a sudden you switch to the evenings, you're not going to be stronger in the evenings just because the research says so. Your body's adjusted to that rhythm. So I always tell clients that I work with, just the consistency when it comes to just routine, and you hear about this from the top bodybuilders, right? They're fanatical about I eat at a certain time, I work out at a certain time, and it's just getting into that biorhythm where the body almost is probably a priority, like increasing dopamine and adrenaline levels in anticipation of that workout, right? You're probably even getting a testosterone and growth hormone increase in anticipation of that. I read, by the way, a very interesting paper showing that doing leg work increased strength and hypertrophy of arm muscles if it was done at the beginning of the workout, because the heavy compound lifts of, like, for instance, squatting releases so much testosterone and growth hormone that's obviously affecting you systemically and creating a growth milieu that allows for your arms to grow. And so kind of almost like creating those optimal conditions will allow for your bicep development, let's say, if you kind of preload it with a squat. Now, if you listen to Dorian Yates, he actually talks about not overtraining it as well.
Who did you just say? I'm sorry.
Dorian Yates was a like 5-6 time Mr. Olympia. He actually talks about as lifters and bodybuilders become more advanced, they actually have to do less exercise. So he says the people do it wrong in that the more enthusiastic people become, the more volume and the more work that they do. And he's saying it's actually a mistake because when you're an amateur lifter, you're not lifting very much heavy weights. So when you're lifting light weights, like you're let's say you're benching a bar, there's not much recovery that needs to happen. And so it's fine for you to work out 5, 6, 7 days a week because you're not destroying your muscles. When you're getting up to professional bodybuilder levels where they're maybe benching 400 plus pounds, the amount of central nervous system activation and strain and muscular micro tear damage that's happening necessitates much more recovery than amateurs. And so he would only train 4 days a week for 45 minutes at a time. Now, it was done obviously at a very high intensity, but he was like, basically the stronger I get and the more I advance, the less actually I'm doing. So I would actually suggest, based on what you're saying, that you're working out hours a day. I don't think you need to work out for hours a day. I actually tell people, if you're working out for more than 45 minutes in the gym, you're probably overdoing it. And you're certainly not working out intensely for more than 45 minutes. So a good 3 to 4 days a week, maybe up to 5 days a week, just depending on your schedule, 3 to 5 days of 30 to 60 minutes max. 45 is probably good enough. You can even do full body workouts in 45 minutes if you're disciplined. Is probably enough for you to get the stimulus to maximize your strength and hypertrophy, but not result in the overtraining that may be resulting in some of the lack of recovery that you're experiencing. So is that something that you think with your schedule and lifestyle you could start getting back into?
Well, I mean, I've been doing this a long time, and so I know how things work. Like I said, I like lifting. I like being at the gym. I like the whole that's just fun for me.
Right.
And so I'm used to the post-workout pain and all the I was capable of working out as much as I wanted for as long as I wanted without any adverse effects for years. And so what I'm wondering is what's changed. And do I need to go see an endocrinologist to see if my growth hormone, I don't know what it is. I think it's just because I'm perceptive and I've noticed a change.
Yeah. Well,
the meds, we've gone up on the amphetamines every day is just to function,
Sure.
can't be good. And then GHB, I don't, you could read up on that.
I'm familiar.
It's interesting. So anyway, this
So
is a complex. I'm not asking you to
yeah, no,
solve my
it,
problems.
it, it is a complex issue. Here's what I would say. Quite frankly, I think you're a little blessed in the sense that if you were able to work out as much as you want with no recovery issues, that is quite frankly unusual. So I mean,
Blessed in some ways, not in others, but
yes, I certainly, we're not all blessed with perfectly on the medical condition side. But I would say, to be honest, like even for a young man, that's pretty unusual. So my concern, and this is just a hypothesis, I may be wrong here, is you may be used to, quite frankly, a level of functioning that is um, quite frankly abnormal, right? And maybe beyond most people's normal. And you may be kind of, I'm going to use the
what do
metaphor.
you mean I can't work out continuously 20 hours a day?
Exactly.
And,
You may be returning a little bit
you
more to
said
normal.
benching 400. Not now, but I could bench 400. I mean,
Totally. But
for my
I
size,
mean,
yeah.
look, I don't know a lot of 57-year-olds who are benching 400. I'll tell you that, who are not on performance
I
enhancing
want to
drugs.
live forever, and I don't want any loss of.
I hear you. So you're obviously
I,
probably
I,
getting at where I'm going, which is
yeah,
it may be some of your return to normalcy, so to speak,
yeah,
maybe a normal functioning of just both age and the complication of your medical condition. Um,
and reasonable
and
expectations.
and reasonable expectations. So what I would suggest though is not to hold you back from further investigation. I would say, hey, look, if you have your lab tests and you want to post them on our Discord community, I'm happy to at least take a look at it with you.
Sure.
And clearly, if there's abnormalities, then absolutely go see an endocrinologist. You can obviously consult with our physicians as part of our program as well. Certainly, if there is a drop in testosterone that sometimes happens with age, although ironically it's really not a function of age, it's really a function of um, people's medical conditions. It's usually an exacerbation of metabolic syndrome that causes actually the drop in excess body fat. Now, if you have noticed, like, you put on more body fat and you're maybe aromatizing more of your testosterone to estradiol, that could be a contributing factor in some of the decrease in strength. So I mean, I will say you can obviously try our protocol. On average, people increase their testosterone 1.5 to 2.5x. I will say, if you haven't had a positive experience with TRT in terms of the strength increases, I'm not sure our protocol, just to be conservative, is going to help. Our protocol, I think, is superior to TRT in terms of its side effect profile, in terms of being non-suppressive, not causing as much issues with like the hair, the conversion to DHT, which is what was causing your body hair growth, etc.
What is the protocol? I'm not.
It's
I
in
haven't started it yet.
we use SERMs, selective estrogen receptor modulators, which you may be familiar with. So we actually
No.
use a derivative, the most common of which is Clomid. We use a stereoisomer of Clomid called enclomiphene, which is a estrogen receptor antagonist. Basically blocks the estrogen receptor in particular places like the hypothalamus. By doing so, the body actually it releases more LH and FSH from the pituitary, and thus stimulates your own testicles to produce more of its own natural testosterone. That's why it's better than TRT, because it's non-suppressive, doesn't cause testicular shrinkage, shutdown, or infertility. It stimulates natural testosterone production, and it works actually quite well with relatively minimal side effects. Now, it still requires functioning testes, obviously, so it doesn't work if you have primary hypogonadism. But
What
give
if
it.
I? What if it's secondary?
If it's secondary, it's a great treatment option. Most of our guys are secondary, and that's much more common, right? It's just like type 2 diabetes is much more common than type 1. So that's kind of the sweet spot in which we work. Like I said, I can't promise that it's going to necessarily significantly restore strength if there's other contributing factors, particularly a loss of recovery or sleep that's contributing to that. But you can certainly try it and see if it works for you. Unlike TRT, there's not a lot of downsides. There's no discontinuation syndrome. Your testosterone levels will increase and then certainly just go back to normal, but they're not going to be suppressed if you discontinue it. But a lot of people obviously do subjectively feel better, and there is research that shows that it increases athletic performance, increases lean body mass, usually gain about 5 pounds of lean mass in about 12 weeks at the highest dosages. And it is banned by professional athletes because it works really well. So, and in fact, sometimes
What does that mean? I didn't quite catch that.
WADA, if you're a professional athlete, the World Anti-Doping Association will not allow you to use our protocol because it is essentially a performance enhancing drug, a PED as I was referring to. So it does work. Otherwise, it wouldn't be banned. But will it work for you? We don't know. You'll have to try it and report back.
Okay. And I know you've taken a lot more time than you probably planned with me. One last question before we go. So this melanocyte, the other component.
This is that you're referring to the Lover protocol, which is a separate protocol. Yeah, that has
that's also a
bremelanotide.
problem. Yeah, that's something for another day, but a subject for another day. But will that help with the strength issue?
What that protocol does, the Lover protocol, tadalafil is synergistic with bremelanotide. So as you know, PDE5 inhibitors have a vasodilating function, so they increase blood flow. So a lot of athletes and bodybuilders like taking it because it gives them those quote-unquote muscle pumps, right, at the gym. And it also,
I wasn't aware of that, but
and it increases muscle protein synthesis. I'm not aware of any research that specifically shows that it enhances strength, right? But we do know that enhancing blood flow and enhancing muscle protein synthesis improves hypertrophy. So it will help you theoretically put on more muscle, but strength gains, I can't make any promises regarding that. But it does have essentially an enhancement function in regards to lifting if you're talking about sort of blood flow.
I mean, that's not the primary thing. I mean, that is one of the primary things, but the sexual stuff is also a problem. And that's what I want to.
Yeah, and then obviously tadalafil is well characterized for improving erectile dysfunction and erectile quality. So that's almost like a no-brainer. So it'll certainly help there.
The other drug you said.
It has a bremelanotide, has libido enhancing. So it enhances the effects of tadalafil, and on its own, to a subtle degree, has libido enhancing properties as well. We use a sublingual form. It's not as obviously potent as the injectable, but it also has less side effects like nausea. So it can accentuate, I will say. It's not going to turn your life around. We don't like to overpromise and underdeliver. But like I said, try it out, see how it works for you.
Okay, sounds good. And I really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
My pleasure, doctor.
So how do I go about getting you my lab?
Go on the discussion forums, maximistribe.com/discord, and you can share them there.
Sounds good. Thanks so much.
My pleasure. Take care.
Take care. Bye.
We had a couple questions come in via YouTube. Since you were just talking about Lover Protocol, how come you don't include oxytocin in your Lover Protocol?
Yeah, it's a great question. There are some other companies that do. I think they underdose their oxytocin. Oxytocin does work sublingually, but it has to be taken at adequate enough dosages, usually 200 IUs or more. Most of the products that I see on the market use like 100 IUs, and you just don't feel very much. In terms of the sexual benefits, it enhances orgasm strength, which is obviously a nice perk. It also enhances, it's a lover cuddle hormone, so it enhances bonding, kind of the emotional experience of sex, which I actually think, obviously as a psychologist, is really important. It's not just about wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, and enjoy your orgasm. Hopefully the sensuality and experience matters. So yes, it could help, but I think when you start introducing multiple drugs, you start to turn into polypharmacy. I think oxytocin honestly has, in my experience clinically, more effects socially than sexually. And so we may end up using it for a different protocol. I actually think oxytocin is a better alcohol substitute than anything. Alcohol is a shitty drug. No amount of alcohol is safe, and it's basically a carcinogen. But people use it obviously to loosen up as a social lubricant. Oxytocin doesn't get you intoxicated, so it's not going to numb your anxiety like alcohol will, but it does have a social enhancement effect in that it does make you kind of warmer, more charismatic, more emotionally attuned and empathic. So I call it kind of the charm drug in a lot of ways, and there's really good research in folks who are on the autism spectrum, who are obviously a little bit socially awkward in terms of helping them. People who have social anxiety, it can be particularly helpful for them. And so I actually think it really shines a little bit more at a party rather than the bedroom, to be honest. And it's just like if you're going into even an important business meeting and you just want to be on point, interesting, engaging, I think oxytocin has more benefits there. So I think that's where the value is, and I think we may work on something more in that realm. I think the Lover Protocol is pretty good as it is with the 2 drugs that we have.
We had another question via YouTube. This one's a little bit more complex. I'm curious about thyroid levels and how they relate to biomarkers, including testosterone and energy levels. I had my blood work done. TSH was slightly high. T3 and T4 both slightly low. General question, how does your thyroid impact your testosterone levels?
Yeah, we don't focus on thyroid at Maximus. It's complicated, and it's almost like a different area of specialty. Men who have hyperthyroidism, so excessively high thyroid levels, tend to have elevated concentrations of testosterone and SHBG. And so if you're low in terms of your thyroid markers, getting that corrected can sometimes help restore testosterone levels. So that's something that sometimes people do. And it is associated with energy as well. If you're low thyroid, you're typically low energy. When you restore your thyroid levels, whether naturally or pharmacologically, people's energy levels go up. But you can overdo it. If you take synthetic T3, T4, desiccated thyroid, and take too much of it, you can get a little overjazzed and develop insomnia. So you have to be careful about that. I would just work with a good endocrinologist on fixing thyroid issues and just make sure. I kind of treat it as something you got to fix before you go and work on other things. Get your thyroid, if there's any issues, in order before you, for instance, go into psychotherapy. Because if you have hyperthyroidism, it can be driving anxiety, and you're going into therapy, and your anxiety is like really physiological. It's not going to be super helpful to work on the psychological side. So make sure your thyroid numbers are reasonable, and then if there's remaining anxiety, you can work on it with a psychologist. Same thing. Make sure the thyroid is not out of whack, and then we can do the hormone optimization stuff with the stuff that we do. So that's kind of the very simplistic, version of it.
We had another question via YouTube. This one relates to the King Protocol. Is there a major difference if you dose enclomiphene every couple days versus daily dosing? Question is, my libido is gone, wondering if it consists of the estrogen antagonism might be causing this. Does the King Protocol have any relation to loss of libido?
If you take excessive dosages of it, and excessive is idiosyncratic to each individual, some people on higher dosages may experience a lowering of libido. Most people experience a higher libido. So I would say, based on the research on Clomid, about 75% of people show improvements in libido, but 75% is not 100. For this 25% of people, they may experience no change or a decrease. And that typically is because, if you excessively block the estrogen receptors in the brain, it's in the same areas that are responsible theoretically for sexual function. So for some folks, the excessive blockage may decrease libido. So yeah, for those folks, it may be that switching to every other day dosage can be helpful. There's just not enough. There's no research evidence on it. Clinically, I think this is something that people are exploring, but it's in consultation with your doctor. You can have a conversation about trying that, and then obviously lowering the dosage. That obviously is the best way. For some people, if you're experiencing lower libido on it, maybe you're just taking too much. And some people are more sensitive, particularly if you're low SHBG. You have higher levels of free testosterone and free estradiol. So blocking the estradiol receptors, you just may have a greater sexual response to it. That's why everyone's different. Everyone needs a different dose. So I would just say consult with your doctor if you're on Maximus's protocol about trying every other day dosage or a lower dose.
We had one more question via YouTube. Best way to increase sperm count?
Enclomiphene does that for you. Not only does it increase LH to increase their testosterone, it significantly increases FSH as well. FSH is what's released by the pituitary to stimulate the testes to produce greater sperm count. And so if you're trying to, maximize sperm count and get your wife pregnant, or if you just want porn star loads, as some people do aesthetically, it will do that as well. So that's the great benefit of SERMs over TRT. TRT, because it shuts down your FSH, literally decreases your sperm count. Not only makes your testicles smaller and shrink, it reduces the seminal volume, or basically the size of your loads. So I don't know if you really care about that, but some people do. So yeah, I would say we don't ever advertise it for that purpose. But logically, if you understand the mechanisms of action, if you increase sperm count, you're increasing seminal volume. So enjoy responsibly. All right, I think we got some questions from Instagram. I'm gonna go back. Yeah, you can call in. Enclomiphene raises free and total T, right? Yes, it does increase both, but we care more about free T, as we talked about. We had a customer say, I did take the combination of Fidogia, ashwagandha, and Tonkat before I started with Maximus. It helped with my numbers, not as much as enclomiphene, and did not help with any symptoms at all, and did not cause any improvements in how I felt at all. So there you go. Another N of one of the wastefulness of testosterone boosting herbs. So don't waste your time with all that nonsense. It doesn't do much. Yes, this is being recorded. Like I said, you can go watch it on YouTube. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for the positive comment. Did his sleep disorder, we were talking about the previous caller, manifest out of nowhere? Did his symptoms show up when he was diagnosed? I believe my recollection, he said he probably had it as early as 13, but it just exacerbated with age. This is a planned podcast. Yeah, every Thursday, 6 to 7 o'clock, we have it. So you can always ask a couple questions typing it in, or you can join us live. So you can just make a request to join the video. Birch Fit, you could just type in questions, or I can stream you in. I did ask your question about enclomiphene raising free and total testosterone. If you're very curious about this, just go on maximustribe.com/science. We have a beautifully written science page that explains the whole science behind how enclomiphene raises free and total testosterone, and it cites the studies as well, so you can look them up. Thoughts on L-reuteri 6475 for testosterone? The studies were promising. This is exactly why rat research is bullshit. I thought the studies were promising too. I believe it was done out of MIT. And I looked at it and I was like, pretty compelling results again, though, in rats. But I was like, look, it's a probiotic. It's probably pretty safe. Let's try it. So I tested my baseline testosterone levels. I found the exact L-reuteri probiotic that was used in the research that showed that it increased testosterone in rats, and took it as indicated, never missed a dose, retested my testosterone levels, and found no difference at all. No difference at all. And so obviously gave up on that. And I was like, this is why rat research does not translate well to humans, because we're just different creatures. And so I think it's useful to use it for hypothesis generation. You're like, oh, okay, if it worked in rats, now we need to do human testing and see, again, if efficacy and safety are there. But just because it works in rats, most of the time it doesn't pan out in humans. And there's another company out there, Umzu, that keeps promoting this probiotic because of those rat research studies and claims it works for humans. And here's the real deal. If it worked in humans, they would publish lab results that show that. And there'd be a human study, and they would take that study and run all over YouTube and brag about it. But years later, after that rat research was done, it's never had a human study that's replicated it, which tells you why, because it doesn't work. So unfortunately, it's a scam. So I wish a probiotic could boost your testosterone, but I'm telling you, nothing over the counter works. Nothing over the counter works. The only thing that potentially could work is if you're clearly vitamin D deficient. Restoring your vitamin D levels it doesn't boost your testosterone. All it does is increase your testosterone back to where it should have been had you not been deficient. but it's not going to get you into super physiological levels. It's not going to do what enclomiphene does. We put it in as part of our building block supplement to make sure that you're not essentially testosterone starved because of your vitamin D deficiency, but it'll get you back to where your normal baseline will be, and then enclomiphene will double it, usually between 1.5 and 2.5x. But other than that, basically a gross nutritional deficiency, nothing over the counter is going to work. All right, anything else from YouTube? All right, I think we should call it a day. Great questions, everyone. Really enjoyed the conversation both live. Thank you to our anesthesiologist caller. Really interesting case study. It's always interesting to talk about sort of the complexities of individual people. And thanks for all the great questions on our Instagram Live, YouTube Live, and hopefully next time we'll get more folks on Twitter Spaces calling in as well. You can join us every week, Thursday, 6 o'clock Pacific time, to talk about hormones, diet, exercise, sleep, focus, and relationships. And you can always catch all 82 previous episodes on our YouTube channel. If you just type in Maximus Tribe and click the subscribe button, subscribe, and please like and comment us on YouTube so we can prime the algorithm and get it out to more people in order to optimize your health. You know, my whole philosophy here is optimize, but don't over-optimize. I'm not one of those influencers that I always make fun of the excessive ice baths and crazy shit that people are doing out there. I'm really focused on things that give you the most bang for your buck, help you live a normal life, healthy life, not an obsessive, perfectionistic life. And so we really focus on the stuff that does more with less. That's a good philosophy to live by. All right, everyone, have a very happy Thursday, and I'll catch you next week.